The Kansas heat in August 1883 pressed down without mercy. A man drove his wagon to the Strand place for a bay gelding. Simple errand, in and out, but the place felt wrong. Curtains drawn at midday. A bucket abandoned in the yard. From the stable facing away from the road came a low, persistent sound. The kind left after crying had stopped expecting an answer. He turned toward the stable. The latch was high on the door, chest height. He lifted the hot iron and stepped inside. Light fell in long shafts through the boards. The bay gelding stood at the far end. She was in the second stall, sitting in the straw. A faded dress, dark hair down, brown eyes steady. She did not call out, she did not beg. 3 cuts marked the post beside her, evenly spaced. Morning, midday, night. The chain lay coiled in the straw. An iron ring bolted low on the wall. He stood there, hat in his hands. What he had walked into was already too late to leave behind. Caldwell, Kansas. August 1883, the kind of August that makes you question every decision that led you to Kansas in the first place. The air didn't move. The grass didn't move. Even the flies seemed too tired to commit to a direction. Heat came up off the road in visible waves, the kind that bent the horizon and made distant things look like they were floating just slightly above where they actually stood. The sky was the color of bleached bone. Not blue exactly, but the memory of blue, wrung out and left to dry. Colt Reeves drove his wagon down the Strand Road, with his hat pulled low and his mind on exactly one thing: a bay gelding. That was it. That was the whole purpose of this particular Tuesday. Ride out to the Strand property. Look at the horse, decide yes or no, ride home. Simple arithmetic. The kind of errand that starts and ends in the same day without leaving a mark on anything. He'd told himself that twice already this morning. Once when he saddled up before dawn to do the feeding. Once when he hitched the wagon and pointed it south. Simple. In and out, he had a ranch to run. 12 horses of his own, each with a name and a personality and a specific complaint about their feet or their feed or the way the weather had been sitting on them lately. A fence line on the south corner that needed 3 more days of work before cold weather arrived and made the ground too hard to drive posts. A roof on the secondary barn that had developed a suspicious quality to it, not leaking yet, but thinking about it. The kind of thinking that would turn into action, the first hard rain of autumn. If he didn't get up there with pitch and shingles before then, he didn't need a 14th horse. Not strictly. But the 2 men at the feed store had each mentioned the gelding, independently, which was the kind of coincidence that functioned as a recommendation in a town this size. And the price Decker Strand was asking was fair, more than fair. If the animal was what they said, Strand was a horse trader of the small-time variety. Not dishonest exactly, but the kind of man who arranged information strategically, who let you believe what you wanted to believe, and called that good salesmanship. Colt had done business with him once before, 4 years back, a transaction involving a roan mare that had been exactly what Strand said she was, and nothing more. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that stuck in the memory, except as the vague outline of a man who smiled too easily, and whose eyes were always working the angles. The Strand property came into view as the road dipped into a shallow valley, the land folding down the way Kansas land occasionally did, not dramatically, not the way land folded in places that had the ambition of mountains, but with the modest practicality of terrain that had decided long ago what it was going to be and had committed to it. A house that needed paint. 2 years ago, maybe 3, the white had gone to the particular gray that comes not from age alone, but from neglect's particular chemistry. The slow-up absorption of dust and weather, and the absence of attention. A porch with a board missing from the second step. Curtains in the windows, which struck Colt as wrong for midday, when any sensible person would have them open to catch whatever thin movement of air the August afternoon permitted. A corral with 5 horses standing in the midday heat, heads low, tails switching at flies with the automated persistence of animals that have given up, expecting conditions to improve. They were, Colt noted, healthy, well-fed. Coats in reasonable condition, despite the summer. Someone was caring for these horses with genuine attention. A water trough at the corral's edge that had gone green around the waterline. Neglected, but recently neglected. The kind of neglected that happens when someone who usually attends to a thing has stopped attending to it. The trough wasn't abandoned, just behind, and set back from the main house, positioned so its door faced away from the road and toward the far fence line, a stable, large boards gone gray from sun exposure. The kind of structure that had been built with purpose and maintained functionally, if not beautifully. The door facing away from the main road was the detail that registered without Colt fully knowing why. Not unusual, exactly, but worth noting. He pulled up at the corral post and tied his horse. He stood for a moment. Something was off, not dramatically off. Not the kind of off that makes a man reach for a weapon or puts his back against something solid. Just the particular quality of a place where things had been left a little too long in states they shouldn't stay in. The curtains wrong for the time of day. The water trough behind on its maintenance. A water bucket sat in the yard, recently filled. He could see the dark wet circle around its base, the dirt still dark and new, but set down halfway between the well and the house. Like someone had picked it up and then stopped mid-errand and not come back. He looked at the corral again. The horses, 5 animals, in good health being cared for by someone who knew what they were doing. He'd look at the gelding and be on his way. That was the sensible thing. That was what he'd come for, except, from somewhere behind him, from the direction of the stable, whose door faced the far fence line instead of the road, a sound came, clo. Hund, indeterminate in its origin, not quite a cry, not sharp enough for that, not sudden enough. More like the residue of a cry, the sound left over after someone has cried for long enough that the urgency has been replaced by something else, something steadier and quieter, and in some ways more troubling. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been making it, long enough to stop expecting anyone to hear it, when it's no longer a call for help and has become something else entirely. Something the body does because the body keeps doing things even when the mind has given up on them mattering. Colt stood still. He was not a man who invented trouble. He had a ranch. He had 12 horses and a fence and a roof and a list of things that needed doing that had not gotten shorter in the 2 years since Anna died, if anything had gotten longer. He did not need additional complications. He did not go looking for problems that weren't his. He turned toward the stable. The door was latched. That was the first thing he noticed, and the noticing had a quality to it. Not the casual observation of a man cataloging his surroundings, but something sharper, the way attention sharpens when a detail lands wrong. A heavy iron latch, set at chest height, his chest height. Not low, the way you'd latch a door to keep an animal in. Horses and cattle you latched low, at their shoulder level, because a latch at their shoulder height was one they couldn't work open with a nose or a hoof. This latch was high, deliberately high. The way you'd latch a door when what you were keeping inside wasn't an animal. The way you'd latch a door when what you were keeping inside was a person. He lifted the latch. The iron was hot from the sun. He pushed the door open and stepped out of the August glare, into the dimness of the stable interior. The air inside was cooler than outside, though not by much. Hay dust hanging in the still air, catching the light that came through the gap between the boards in long diagonal shafts, slow and golden like something suspended in amber. 3 stalls to the left, 2 to the right. At the far end, in the last stall on the left, the bay gelding shifted on his feet, young, 15 hands maybe, a good honest color with a white sock on the left rear. Sound looking. Exactly what he'd been described as by 2 men at the feed store, who probably hadn't known they were conspiring to get Colt Reeves to drive out here on a Tuesday. He almost walked straight to it, almost. She was in the second stall on the right. He saw the stall first, the door slightly ajar, the chain coiled in the straw, and then he saw her, and the order of perception mattered because it gave him a half second to understand what he was looking at before he had to respond to it. Sitting on the straw-covered ground with her knees pulled to her chest, a cotton dress that had been washed so many times it had surrendered its original color, whatever it had been, cream or pale yellow or something with warmth in it, had become a kind of nothing color, the color of cloth that has been through too much. Her dark hair was down, hanging loose around her face. 18 years old, though she might have looked younger if she hadn't had the eyes she had, brown, almost gray. The color of something that's been through weather and has come out the other side of it still standing. She had not moved when he opened the door, had not called out, had not startled at the sudden light or the sound of the latch. She had just watched him enter, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that quick reactions have costs and has decided to assess before committing to any. She was watching him now, not with fear, with evaluation, the careful measuring attention of a person who has learned to read men quickly and accurately because the stakes of misreading them were too high. He looked at her wrist, then looked away, then looked back, because the first look hadn't been long enough to fully process what he'd seen, and his mind needed confirmation that it was seeing what it thought it was seeing. Marks on both wrists. Not fresh, not all old either. Layered, the way marks accumulate when the same thing happens to the same patch of skin repeatedly over a long period. The skin had cycled from bruised to calloused, and back to bruised again. There was a rawness to the more recent marks, a redness that suggested they were days old rather than weeks. And on the wooden post beside her, 3 cuts, not scratches, cuts, made with intention and a sharp edge, shallow enough to be deliberate, deep enough to be permanent. Evenly spaced, which was the detail that struck him hardest, because even spacing suggested calculation, suggested someone who had thought about what they were doing before they did it. Morning. Midday. Night. He looked at the iron ring bolted into the wall of the stall at ankle height. The chain lying in the straw, its far end fitted with a cuff. He looked at the cuff and at her wrists and understood the full picture with the finality of a man who has been shown something he cannot unsee. Colt removed his hat. He didn't say anything. Yet. He was operating on some instinct he couldn't have articulated, something that told him the wrong first word would close whatever was currently, very slightly, open. She was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and in that silence, something was being decided that would be undecidable the moment either of them spoke. She spoke first. Her voice was quiet, steadier than it had any right to be, given what he was looking at and what he had just understood. The gelding favors his left front in cold weather. Colt blinked. Pardon? The bay. She didn't look at the horse. Kept her eyes on Colt, watchful and steady. He has a slight weakness in the left front tendon. Doesn't show in summer. The warmth keeps it loose. You won't see it today. But come October, when the ground goes cold and hard, he'll start favoring it on mornings. Not bad enough to lame him. Bad enough to matter if you're working him. A pause measured. My father won't tell you that. Colt stood with his hat in his hands and looked at this girl in a locked stall, with chain marks on her wrists, who had led with information about a horse's tendon, instead of with a plea for help. What's your name? He said. Ada. Ada Strand? Yes. He looked at the latchkey hanging on a nail beside the stable entrance, then at the iron ring in the stall wall, then at the length of chain, then back at Ada, who had not looked away from him since he'd entered. How long have you been in here? She glanced at the post beside her, the 3 cuts. Then back at him, since yesterday morning, does he? He stopped. Started again differently. Is this often enough? She said, which answered the question he hadn't quite finished asking. Colt looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Direct, patient. Still measuring him, still running her evaluation, still deciding. And then he understood what the first thing she'd said had actually been. Not information about a horse, a test. She had given him something true and specific and useful. Something she didn't have to give him, something that cost her nothing to withhold, and she was waiting to see what he did with it. Waiting to see whether he was the kind of man who filed away useful information and moved on, or the kind of man who understood that when a person in a bad situation offers you something useful, the useful thing is secondary to the situation. He looked at the door. He looked at her. He walked to the nail and took the latchkey down. He didn't get to use it yet, because that was the moment boots crunched on gravel outside. Heavy footsteps, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who didn't feel the need to hurry on his own property, who owned the ground he walked on and knew it. Decker Strand was coming back from the well. Colt turned and stepped back toward the center of the stable, a natural movement, not hiding anything, not telegraphing anything, just repositioning himself, so he wasn't standing with his hand on the latchkey when Decker came through the door. Decker Strand came in from the August glare with a politician face already arranged, the wide smile that arrived before the rest of him, and that had the quality of something practiced rather than felt. 52 years old, broad across the shoulders, gone soft through the middle, a man who had been physically formidable once, and had let that go to ruin while keeping the memory of it in the way he carried himself. Red-faced from the heat or the walk or something that had been fermenting in him since morning, he stopped when he saw Colt, a half-second where the smile underwent a recalibration. Then it widened, smoothed, became more of itself. Reeves, easy. As if they'd arranged to meet here. Didn't hear you ride in? Hear about the gelding? I am, Colt said. Neither of them mentioned Ada. Decker's eyes went to the stall for just a moment. A flick. Quick enough that a man not paying attention might have missed it. Not long enough to be read as anything specific. But it carried a message, and the message wasn't aimed at Colt. She gets dramatic in the heat, Decker said then. Casual. Gestural. The way you'd mention a loose board on the porch, something mildly inconvenient that you'd gotten around to dealing with eventually. Gets restless. Wild streak. Her mother had the same thing. I keep her close so she doesn't run off and embarrass herself. Colt looked at the latch, at its height, at the specificity of its positioning. She's locked in, he said. Door swings open if you don't latch it. Decker's smile didn't waver. Horse kicked through it last spring. Been latching it since. This latch is at chest height, Colt said. Mine. A fractional pause. Wind, Decker said. The word dropped into the air between them and sat there. Wind. The kind of word you put down like a period, like a door closing, like the end of a subject that you had decided was finished. Colt had been in enough conversations with enough men to know when a word was being used to close something rather than explain something. He let it go. For now, I'll take the gelding, he said, and I'll hire Ada for the drive back to my ranch. Need an extra set of hands for the return trip. I'll pay fair wages. Decker's smile changed. Didn't leave his face but changed its nature. Like something behind it had pulled taut. She's not available for hire. She's not livestock either, Colt said. And that was the sentence that ended the conversation. There was no preamble to what happened next. No escalation of voices, no posturing, no warning. One moment of ordinary stable air. And then, Decker Strand was moving with the speed and aggression of a man who had spent 20 years winning fights by being willing to go further than the other person expected. The first swing caught Colt on the shoulder, not his head. His shoulder, which suggested aim rather than pure rage, the shoulder being the shot that spins a man sideways and opens him up for the next one. It connected hard and spun Colt half a step sideways into the stall door. The wood rattled. Somewhere in the stable a horse kicked at its stall wall, sharp and startled. Colt caught himself on the doorframe. He was not quick. He had never been quick. That was simply a fact about him, the way some men are quick and some men are something else. What he was steady. The kind of steady that comes from working land with your body for 12 years and understanding that force without balance is wasted, and that the man who stays on his feet longest usually wins. Decker swung again, going for the head this time. Colt moved inside the arc, too close for the punch to connect with full force, close enough to catch Decker's collar with both hands. He drove backward, not trying to throw Decker, just trying to move him, to use the man's own forward momentum against him. They went into the stable wall together. The boards shook. Dust sifted down from the rafters. A pair of sparrows shot out through a gap near the roof with the explosive alarm of birds that had been sitting quietly and suddenly were not. Decker was heavier than he looked. Strong through the torso still, whatever had gone soft elsewhere. He got his feet under him and pushed, and they went sideways together, hit a support beam, caromed off it and hit a feed barrel. The barrel went over. Oats scattered across the straw-covered floor in a pale cascade. He fought with anger rather than skill. 30 years of winning fights, because he was willing to go further and hit harder than the people he chose to fight. He hadn't recalibrated for a man who had a different kind of willingness. One punch to the ribs. Measured. Placed. Colt's knuckles found the gap between the lower ribs and the hip, the soft spot that doesn't harden, no matter how much a man works out. Decker buckled. His hand went to the wall, found a hanging bridle hook, closed around it. Colt caught the wrist before the swing connected, turned it. Used the momentum, the same way you use a horse's weight against itself when it's pulling against you. Redirect rather than resist. Sent Decker into the feed barrel corner in an ungraceful fall that was heavy and complete. The kind of fall that knocks the wind out and takes a moment to recover from. He was down, not finished thinking, but down. Ada moved, not a leap, not the dramatic movement of someone who had been waiting for a moment to act. A deliberate, quiet movement from the corner of the stall where she'd pressed herself against the wall. She reached down to the stable floor, gathered a handful of straw, and threw it directly into her father's face. A child's action. Practically useless in almost every conceivable scenario. In this specific scenario, perfectly accurate. Decker cursed, clawed at his face, lost exactly the seconds he couldn't afford to lose. Colt had the latch key already. He went to Ada's stall, fit the key into the lock, pulled the door open. Ada stood up. She didn't rush. She stood, smoothed the front of her dress once with both hands. The gesture of someone organizing themselves before stepping out into something, and then walked out of the stall with the particular composure of a person who has been rehearsing this moment for a very long time and had decided they were going to walk through it rather than run. Running would have suggested something provisional. Walking said she was done. She picked up nothing on the way out because there was nothing to pick up. Everything she owned was either on her body or represented by those 3 cuts on the wooden post. Decker was halfway up. Colt stepped between him and Ada, close enough that it was personal, close enough that the communication it carried. Didn't need words. If I hear you've laid a hand on her again, Colt said, and his voice was quiet, in the way that quiet is more serious than shouting. I'll come back with the law. And I won't come alone. Decker looked at him from the floor, still calculating. The anger had compacted into something colder, something that lived behind the eyes rather than in the body. A man shifting from one approach to another. You just made a significant mistake, Decker said. Blood at the corner of his mouth from where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek in the fall. Voice controlled now, the rage tamped down behind something more deliberate. You understand that, maybe, Colt said. We'll see. He found an old canvas coat behind the wagon seat. Left there from last winter, a habit he'd maintained for reasons he couldn't have articulated. Some instinct that said, keep something warm available, even in summer, because you never knew. He handed it to Ada without comment. She took it without comment, wrapped it around her shoulders despite the August heat, pulled it close around her like something she was deciding to trust, and sat straight on the wagon bench as Colt untied his horse and climbed up beside her. The wagon rolled out of the Strand property at a walk. Ada did not look back. Not once, not at any point during the long pull out of the valley and up the grade to the main road. She faced forward with the deliberate purposefulness of someone who has decided that what's behind them has been finished with. They crossed the dry creek bed at the bottom of the valley, wheels grinding over the smooth stones of the dry bed, and then climbed the long grade back toward the Caldwell Road. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had just been through something together and were each, in their own way, working out what it meant and what came next. The sun was leaning west. Still hot. Still pressing down with the particular insistence of August in Kansas, which doesn't relent in the afternoon the way summer does, in places that have more water in the air. It was Ada who spoke first. "He's going to go to town," she said. Her voice was level. "Factual, I know," Colt said. "Not after us. He'll go straight to the sheriff. That'd be my guess." A pause. The wagon wheels ground over a stretch of rocky road and then back to packed dust. "You're not worried about that?" Colt considered the question. "Gave it the honest consideration it deserved. I'm going to have to be," he said. "But." "Not yet." Ada looked at him from the side. A long, careful look that he felt more than saw. The kind of look that contains measurement, that is running calculations, that has not yet arrived at a conclusion. "You came for a horse," she said. "I did." "You didn't leave with one." "No. Does that bother you?" He thought about it. "Genuinely, the horse will be fine," he said. "He's got a bad tendon anyway. Something happened in Ada's face. Not a smile, not quite. The suggestion of one, the sketch of one, like a door that moves slightly in a breeze without fully opening. There and gone." Then she said the thing that changed the nature of the ride. "You don't know what you just walked into. I have some idea," Colt said. "No, quiet. Certain. Not challenging, just accurate. You don't. But I'll tell you. When I decide you won't hand me back," he looked at her then. "Has someone done that? Handed you back?" The suggestion of a smile closed entirely. She looked at the road, the dust, the way the heat made it shimmer at the edges of vision. "When I decide," she said. And that was all. They rode the rest of the way to his ranch in silence. And the silence had weight to it now, had content. There were things in it. Things he didn't know yet that she was deciding whether to tell him, and things she was waiting to see in him before she decided. Colt's ranch sat 2 miles west of Caldwell. Not large by the standards of men who measured themselves in acreage, not the kind of spread that got pointed out to visitors as an example of what a man could accomplish, but solid. The kind of solid that comes from sustained attention, over time, from a person who had decided this was the place and had committed to it, with the particular completeness of someone who doesn't believe in hedging. A house, a main barn, a secondary stable, a corral, a well that had never gone dry, not even in the summer of 1880, when everything else in Ford County seemed to be considering it. Fence line on 3 sides in good repair, not perfect, but intentional. The south corner needed work, had needed it for 2 weeks now, but the south corner would keep. He pulled the wagon up to the house and got down. Ada got down on her own, from her own side, without waiting for assistance. She stood in the yard and looked at the property, with an expression that contained nothing sentimental. She was doing something more practical than admiring the place. She was reading it. Taking in the distances between structures, the angles of sight lines, the ways in and out, the professional inventory of a person who has learned to assess new spaces for their properties before allowing herself to think about anything else. "There's a room," Colt said. "Off the kitchen." He stopped. It had been Anna's. Not officially her room. She had slept in the same room he had, the same bed, and he had been sleeping in it alone for 2 years now, which was a thing he had gotten used to, in the way you get used to an absence, which is to say imperfectly. But the small room off the kitchen had been Anna's in the ways that mattered. Her sewing machine had lived there, her books, her writing table, where she had maintained a correspondence with her sister in Missouri that was more regular and more detailed than anything Colt had written to anyone in his life. She had sat in that room in the mornings before he woke up He knew because he had occasionally opened his eyes to the sound of the sewing machine's rhythm, distant and rhythmic, like something breathing. He cleared his throat. "It's empty," he said. "You can use it." Ada looked at the window of the room from outside. Small window, facing east. She couldn't see inside from where she stood. She was looking at the window itself, at its size, maybe, at the presence of it, at what it represented. "Does the door lock from inside?" she said. "It does," he said. She nodded. Once, the nod of a person who has registered something important and filed it away. That was that. The first hour passed quietly. He made coffee on the stove and brought it out to the porch where Ada had settled herself. Not in the chair on the right, which had been Anna's, but on the porch steps, where she could see the whole yard and the road and the corral. He brought her water also, and a piece of bread with butter, which she ate, standing at the kitchen window later, when he went inside to check on things. He didn't push her with questions. He had been alive long enough to know that pushing a person who had been through something was almost always the wrong instinct, even when you meant well, especially when you meant well. He let her be. She let him be. The afternoon moved around them. That first evening as the sun went down and the kitchen light went orange, the way it did in August when the angle was right, he noticed Ada's shoulders change. She had been calm. Or what passed for calm, a controlled stillness that was not the same thing as peace, but served some of the same functions. But, as the day faded and the light changed, something happened to her posture. A quality of attention that wasn't quite anxiety and wasn't quite vigilance came over her. She wasn't panicking, she was bracing. The body preparing itself for something that had been scheduled 3 times a day. He had thought about those marks on the post for the entire ride back. Morning, midday, night. 3 intervals. And here was the night interval arriving, and her body keeping the appointment it had been trained to keep, even though the thing the appointment was for wasn't coming. "Come help me with the evening feed," Colt said. Ada looked at him. "The horses," he said. "I do the feeding at the same time every evening." Extra set of hands helps. It wasn't true. He'd been doing the evening feeding alone for 2 years without difficulty. But she didn't know that. She set down her water cup and followed him out to the stable. They worked for 40 minutes. Hay and grain measured and distributed. Water buckets checked and filled. He walked her through each horse, their names, their dispositions, their particular requirements. The roan mare with the sensitive left shoulder that you had to approach from the right. The gray gelding who was 17 years old and arthritic in the mornings, but still sound enough if you didn't rush him. The 2-year-old chestnut filly who was going to be something extraordinary if she got the right training and the right patience. Ada listened, asked a question about the roan's stance, got an answer. Asked another about the gray's diet. Practical questions. The questions of someone who knew horses and was interested in knowing these specific horses. By the time they walked back to the house, the night interval had passed. She didn't say anything about it, but her shoulders had come down. Not all the way, not even halfway, but down, perceptibly, measurably down. That first night, Colt sat on the porch after Ada had gone to her room. He heard the lock turn. Quiet, deliberate. A sound that wasn't secretive. She wasn't hiding that she was locking it. She was simply locking it, the way you lock a door when you have decided that a locked door is what you need. He listened to the Kansas night settle around the ranch. Not quiet. The Kansas night was never quiet, exactly. It had its own frequency, made up of insects and the distant call of things hunting, and the particular sound of grass when it moves without wind. The sound that is almost a sound. He had grown accustomed to this frequency over 12 years, and could read it the way some men read weather, could tell from its texture what the night was going to be. Tonight's texture was ordinary. August ordinary, hot and dense, and full of life going about its business in the dark. He thought about what he'd done, not with regret, with the particular clarity that comes when you've done something that can't be undone. done. And you want to understand it correctly before morning, when the shapes of things shift again and clarity is harder to hold. He had driven to the Strand property for a horse. He had found something else. He had made a decision in the space of 2 minutes based on a door latched from the outside, and 3 marks on a post, and a girl who had led with information about a horse's tendon instead of with tears. And now there was a girl locked in the room that had been his dead wife's, and a kidnapping complaint that Decker Strand was almost certainly filing right now at the sheriff's office in Caldwell, while the lamp in that burned low, and Sheriff Amos Telfer sat across from a man he'd known for years and made careful notes about the things that man was telling him. He was going to need to be careful. He poured coffee from the pot he'd left on the fire and held the cup in both hands and thought. He thought about his neighbor, Tolliver. 3 years back. A man with a wife whose explanations for bruises had never quite matched what bruises looked like. Not in their shape, not in their placement, not in their frequency. Colt had noticed. He had noticed more than once. He had been at the feed store one afternoon when Tolliver came in, and the thought had moved through him. Say something, and then a different thought had come, quieter and more persuasive. It's not your business. People's home lives are their own. You don't know what you're seeing. She had left eventually. Gone to her sister in Wichita. The marriage had dissolved. Nothing catastrophic had happened in the interval between the afternoon at the feed store and the day she left, probably. That was the word, probably. He didn't know. He had made a choice that meant he would never know, and the not knowing had an edge to it that hadn't rusted. He thought about it sometimes, in the particular inventory that the mind does at night when there's nothing to distract it from its own accounting. Had it been fine? Probably. Had his silence contributed to something he couldn't see from where he stood? Also probably, he wasn't about to add Ada Strand to the list. He sat with the stars and the coffee and the August night till it was late enough that sleep made sense, and then he went inside. She told him, the first piece in the morning. They were eating breakfast, eggs from the 3 hens he kept in a small coop behind the house. Bread he'd baked 2 days ago that was still good, coffee that was the best thing he made. Ada had been quiet through most of it, the kind of quiet that had a quality to it, a texture different from the silence of the night before. This was the quiet of someone who had made a decision during the night and was now working out how to execute it. There was someone before, she said. Colt set his coffee down. She looked at the table while she spoke, not at him. But he had the sense she was watching him from the edge of her attention, tracking his reactions, the way you track something you can't afford to miss. A man named Forrest, she said. He came to the property 8 months ago. Cattle buyer from Abilene. He saw she stopped. Reorganized. He saw enough. He offered to take me out and I was back at the Strand property in 6 days. Colt looked at her. Not because he was cruel, she said immediately, because she had read what he was thinking. He wasn't. He just... She turned her, coffee. Small rotations. He didn't believe me when I told him about the land, about the document. He thought I was confused. He thought I was. A pause, and in the pause something passed through, her face that was not quite a smile, but was the memory of one. The kind of expression that appears when something is almost funny in the worst possible way. He said, girls get dramatic when they're kept too close. She looked up. Almost the same words as my father. Colt was quiet. He filed a missing persons complaint in Abilene. She continued, Forrest didn't want the trouble. So he walked me back up my father's front steps. A beat, very politely. The way you return a package that was delivered to the wrong address. I'm sorry, Colt said. She looked at him then, directly, and the look contained something like surprise. The small surprise of a person who has said something difficult and has not expected to be met with those particular 2 words. After that, she said, I decided that if I was going to get out, I had to do it myself. Or I had to find someone who understood what they were walking into before they took a step. You were still deciding whether that's me. I decided last night, she said. during the evening feed. When you talked about the roan mare's left shoulder like it mattered, Colt waited. It did matter, he said. I know, Ada said. That's why. The second piece came that evening. She led him to it herself. Ada had spent the afternoon doing things around the property, useful things, things that needed doing, moving through the ranch, with the quiet efficiency of someone who needed the motion more than the accomplishment. She patched a gap in the chicken coop wire, using scraps from the storage lean-to. She organized the tack hanging near the barn entrance, coiling the lead ropes, and hanging the bridles by their earpieces, the way someone had once taught her was the right way. Small repairs done with practiced hands. In the early evening, Colt went to check on the horses and found her in an empty stall with a piece of charcoal in her hand, drawing on the board beside her. He stopped at the stall entrance. She heard him but didn't stop drawing. He looked at what she was making. Not a drawing in the artistic sense. A map, property lines, a creek running east to west, a ridge to the north, road access from two directions. Distances that had been estimated with care. The kind of map a person makes from memory when they have been studying a piece of land for long enough that the details have become permanent. He recognized the general geography. The creek that ran behind the Strand property, or rather beside it, the piece of land adjacent to the Strand land, down in the valley where the creek ran, that wasn't his land. That wasn't Strand's land either. That was the creekfront parcel. That's the Strand property, he said. The land beside it, she said, not looking up. The creekfront parcel. She shaded in the creek's path with the flat of the charcoal. My mother's land. Her family's, originally. She put it in my name in her will. Filed at the Ford County Land Office, properly witnessed. The year before she died, Colt came and sat on the stall floor across from her. Your father wants it, he said. He needs it, she said. The distinction precise and deliberate. There's a difference. Want is something you can walk away from. She set the charcoal down and looked at the map for a moment. 3 months ago, she said. He took me to the land office in Caldwell. His lawyer met us there. He had the transfer document ready. Her hands were in her lap and completely still, in the way hands become still when a person is managing something carefully and cannot afford the distraction of movement. All I had to do was sign it, did you? Yes, the word flat, final sounding, like a door closing then. But, and in that one word was something else entirely. Not hope, something more deliberate than hope, more structural, more like hope that had been engineered rather than felt. She looked at him. I signed the wrong name. Colt went still, on purpose, she said. Not that it needed saying. How wrong? My full name is Ada Marin Strand. She said each part clearly so he could hear it complete. On the document, I signed it Ada Marin Strand. She watched his face. 2 letters transposed in the middle name. Small enough that someone reading quickly would pass over it. Large enough that, if anyone compared it against my signature on file at the land office, it would void the transfer, he said, potentially. Yes. She picked up the charcoal again and turned it in her fingers. I planned it 2 months before the day they brought me in to sign, because I knew that day was coming, and I needed to have something in my hand when it arrived. Colt looked at the map on the board wall, the careful lines, the measured distances. The creek marked precisely where it bent. The marks on the post, he said. In your father's stable, she looked at him. They weren't counting days, he said. A pause. Something shifting in her attention. No, she said. What were they counting? Survey points, she said. The 3 boundary markers on the southern edge of the creek parcel. The ones that define where the property legally begins. She looked at the map. I needed to remember them exactly. In order. In case I was ever in a position to describe the land in front of someone official. Colt sat with that. The stable. The chain. The 3 marks that everyone who saw them would assume were days or violations counted, numbered, tracked for some private psychological purpose. And they were none of that. They were data. They were preparation. You've been running this for over a year, he said. 14 months. she said. "Since the week after my mother died and I found the deed filed at the land office with my name on it, what were you waiting for?" The gray-brown eyes direct. "Steady. The right moment," she said. "The right person, or both." A pause. "I didn't have either yet." "Then you opened the door," said simply. "The way you state a fact that has already been processed and filed. I still don't have everything I need," she said. "A voided signature can still be argued against. I need someone to testify to my state when I signed. I need the discrepancy formally noted." She paused. "And I need my father stopped before any of that can happen." She looked at him and said the name that had clearly been at the front of her thinking for a long time. "Doc Pruitt. What about him?" "He examined me in April. My father brought me in, told him I'd fallen from a horse." She turned the charcoal in her fingers, slow rotations. "Doc Pruitt is not a foolish man. He looked at my wrists. He looked at me. Did he say anything? No, a beat. But he looked at me the way a person looks when they're writing things down in their head." She set the charcoal on the stall floor. "I need to know if he wrote them down on paper, too." 3 days after Colt brought Ada to his ranch, Orrin Bascom came riding up the front road at 8 in the morning, and the way he was riding said the news wasn't good. Orrin was 59 years old. Wide in the shoulders. Narrower than he used to be everywhere else. The particular shape of a man who had spent decades doing physical work, and whose body had restructured itself around the specifics of that work. A smithy when he was young, not in Caldwell, but in the town 40 miles west where he'd grown up, working the forge that his father had built and his grandfather had used before that. He'd come to Caldwell at 35 with a wife who had died the following winter, and a skill set he'd adapted into cattle work and then into the small horse operation. He now ran 2 miles east of Colt's property. They had been neighbors for 7 years. Not close in the way some men are close. Not the kind of friendship that involved regular visits or meals shared, or the kind of comfortable intimacy that develops when two people spend time together without purpose. But the kind of neighbor who appears when appearing is needed without being summoned, without making a production of it. He tied his horse at the post and came up the porch steps without knocking, and found Colt at the kitchen table with coffee. He poured himself a cup without being invited, which was his habit, and sat down, which was also his habit, and got directly to it, which was also his habit. Decker Strand filed a kidnapping complaint with Amos Telfer. "Day before yesterday," he said. "I know," Colt said. "Telfer came to see me yesterday. Asked what I knew about you and the situation with the Strand girl." Orrin drank his coffee, considered. "I told him I knew you were a man who didn't do things without reason." "What'd he say?" "He said the complaint was filed, and he didn't have a choice about that." Orrin paused. "But he said it the way a man says something he wants you to know." He's saying reluctantly. Colt thought about Amos Telfer. 2 years as sheriff of Caldwell. Not a bad man in any meaningful sense. Not corrupt, not lazy, not cruel. But cautious in the way that men in his position sometimes became cautious when they decided that longevity required not seeing certain things too clearly. "He'll have to move on it, eventually," Colt said. "He will." Orrin agreed, but eventually isn't today. They sat in the morning quiet. "Strand's in Caldwell," Orrin said, "at the Silver Colt. He's got 2 men with him. From town. The kind that lean on walls. They were here, day before yesterday evening." "What happened?" Colt told him. Orrin listened without interrupting, which was also his habit. The habit of a man who has learned that listening completely is more useful than listening partially and inserting yourself. When Colt finished, Orrin set his cup down. "The girl," he said. "She's here. She's handling things." "What things specifically?" "She had a plan," Colt said. 2 months before her father forced her to sign the transfer document, she signed wrong on purpose. Transposed 2 letters in her middle name. A long pause. Orrin's expression doing something that wasn't quite surprise. "Well," he said, "yes. That's not a girl who needs rescuing," Orrin said. "No," Colt said. "That's what I'm starting to understand. Then what does she need?" "Back up," Colt said. and I need to talk to Doc Pruitt." Orrin picked up his cup, finished his coffee, and set it down with the finality of a man who has made a decision and is done deliberating. "Go," he said. "I'll be here." Caldwell in August wore its rubbles under its regular clothes. The main street had its usual Tuesday morning population. Wagons at the hitching rails, men in and out of the feed store and the hardware, a woman carrying a basket covered with a cloth, moving purposefully toward somewhere. The Silver Colt had its doors open to catch any movement of air that might be persuaded to pass through. The land office was locked, which was unusual for a Wednesday morning, and which Colt filed away without commenting on. Telfer's horse was outside the sheriff's office. He rode through without stopping and went to Doc Pruitt's house at the east end of the main street. Doc Pruitt was 63 years old, with the kind of face that comes from 4 decades of being handed information you didn't ask for and cannot unknow. Deep lines. Eyes that had stopped being surprised by what they saw at bad hours. He kept his examination room in the front of his house and his life in the back, and maintained a practiced separation between the two. Though Colt suspected the separation was less complete than it appeared. He opened the door before Colt could knock. "Reeves," he said, unsurprised. "I wondered when you'd come inside." The examination room had the smell of carbolic and old wood, and something medicinal that Colt couldn't put a name to. The smell of a room where difficult things happened regularly and were managed with competence, if not ease. Doc Pruitt sat behind his desk and Colt sat across from him, and neither of them pretended that this was a social visit. "April 14th, Colt said. "Ada Strand came in with her father. He told you she'd fallen from a horse." Doc Pruitt opened a desk drawer, removed a small brown notebook, set it on the desk between them and kept his hand on it. 19 years practicing medicine in this town, he said. His voice had the particular quality of a man building towards something and not wanting to rush the build. "I have examined men after fights, women after falls, children after accidents and after things that weren't accidents." He looked at the notebook. "I know what a horse fall looks like. I know what it does and doesn't look like. What did Ada Strand look like?" A pause. Working out how to say it correctly, "She had contusions on both wrists," he said. "Consistent with prolonged contact, with a restraint, not rope, something harder. Metal, based on the width and uniformity. She had bruising on the left forearm, approximately 2 weeks old. She was exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't account for. The cumulative kind." He stopped. "She was not alone when she came in. Her father was present throughout the examination. Did you ask her about the wrists?" "I asked if they were from the fall." He looked at Colt. "She said yes." Said it quickly, to a practiced answer. Not a lie she was making up. A lie she had said before. A pause. "I wrote it all down." His hand was still on the notebook. "Why didn't you go to Telfer?" Colt said. The silence that followed carried weight. "Because I had observation," Doc Pruitt said finally. "I had what I saw and what I wrote down. I didn't have corroboration. A bruise and a father's explanation, and a young woman who said it was a fall. Telfer would have needed more, and without action, going to Telfer would have accomplished nothing except making Decker Strand aware that I was watching." He looked at his hands on the desk. "And she would have come back to me with worse injuries and better stories." He slid the notebook across the desk. "She told you about me," he said. Not a question. She said, "You were a man who wrote things down." Doc Pruitt looked at the notebook between them. "I'm old," he said. "I'm tired, and I have spent 4 months being ashamed of a decision I made in 60 seconds. He looked up. "I'll testify to everything in that notebook. If it comes to that, it'll come to that," Colt said. "Then I'll be ready." He nodded at the notebook. "Take it. I have a copy." Colt picked it up and stood. "Reeves," Doc Pruitt said. He turned. "She knew I'd recorded it," Doc said. "When she walked in with her father in April, she knew what I would see, and she knew I would write it down. She was counting on it." He shook his head slowly. "She's been building this for a long time." 14 months, Colt said. Doc Pruitt was quiet for a moment. She's been in that situation for 14 months, he said, and she's been doing exactly the right thing for all 14 of them. He looked at Colt with something steady in his eyes. Don't let her down. I'm doing my best. Colt said, do better than that, Doc Pruitt said. He rode back through the middle of Caldwell, and he saw through the Silver Colt's open door, Decker Strand in the back at a table, not drinking, not playing cards. Sitting across from a man Colt didn't recognize, well-dressed in the way that Caldwell wasn't well-dressed. A leather satchel on the table beside him, the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being the most patient person in whatever room they occupied. Colt didn't slow his horse, but he noted it Wichita money. The kind that travels to collect on things. He rode home. Ada was at the fence when he got back. She had positioned herself where she could see every approach to the property. The road from the south, the path from the barn, the gate. The professional geometry of someone who had spent a long time in situations where knowing who was coming before they arrived had mattered. She turned when she heard his horse. He got down and handed her Doc Pruitt's notebook without preamble. She took it, opened it, read the entry for April 14th. She stood at the fence and read it twice. When she looked up, her face was very still. Something had moved through it that she had gotten under control, before he could see it clearly. What remained was the after effect, a brightness at the edges of her eyes that she was not going to allow to become anything more than brightness. He wrote it down, she said. He wrote it down, Colt said, and he'll testify to it. She closed the notebook. Held it. There was a man in town, Colt said. At the Silver Colt with your father. Well-dressed. Leather satchel. Not from Caldwell. Ada's expression didn't shift, but she'd already known. He could see that she'd known Rudd Kane. She said, you know him? I know the name. She looked at the road, at the direction of Caldwell. He's who my father owes. All of it. A pause, calculating. He's been patient. 6 months from my mother's death was the arrangement. That means 8 weeks, Colt said. 8 weeks, she said. Give or take. They stood at the fence in the late afternoon. The grass was still, the way it had been all day. Still and golden patient. He's not going to stop, Ada said. No, Rudd Kane won't let him. My father is out of options. Colt looked at the horizon to the south, where the Strandland was, where the creekfront parcel sat with its cottonwood trees and its legal description and its filed deed with Ada Strand's name on it. Then we need to be ready, he said. Ada looked at him. Not testing anymore. Past that. Something else in her eyes now. Not the trust that comes from long acquaintance. The trust that comes from a person who has shown you in a series of specific moments that they understand the nature of the problem and are not going to pretend it is smaller than it is. I need you to be prepared to speak for yourself, Colt said. In Telfer's office. In front of whoever else needs to be in the room, in your own words. Without anyone summarizing you or softening you or translating you. I've been thinking about what I'd say for 14 months, she said. I know, he said. I want you to say it. Ada looked at the fence post in front of her, the old wood, gray and sun-bleached, no marks on it, nothing carved. Nothing to count. Whatever Rudd Kane is here to do, she said. It's going to move fast now. Yes, he said. We don't have much time, no, he said. But we have tonight, she looked at him. And then she nodded once. The way she made all her decisions, quietly, completely, without performance. Tonight's enough, she said. The Kansas evening came in slow and amber and enormous, and somewhere in Caldwell, at the back table of the Silver Colt, Decker Strand sat across from a man with a leather satchel and ran out of easy options, while his daughter stood at a fence on a neighboring property and prepared for the 14th month in a row exactly what she was going to do next. The morning after Rudd Kane arrived in Caldwell, the air changed, not the weather. The weather stayed the same, August staying August, with the particular stubbornness of a season that has committed fully to itself. But something else shifted. The quality of the morning. The way the light came in through the kitchen window, with an edge to it that hadn't been there the day before. Colt felt it before he understood it. He was at the fence with his coffee when Orrin Bascom's horse came up the road, at a pace that was not Orrin's usual pace. Orrin was a measured man. Orrin rode like a man who had decided that whatever was going to happen, and arriving faster didn't change it. He was riding fast. Colt set his coffee down. "Telfer came to see me this morning," Orrin said, pulling up at the gate, not dismounting, which said something. Before the feed store opened, the complaint's formal now. Kidnapping and assault. Signed by Decker, witnessed by 2 men from the Silver Colt. He steadied his horse, which was sensing his tension. Telfer said he doesn't want to move on it. "But the paperwork's in." "How long?" "Days," Orrin said. "Not weeks." Ada was at the kitchen window. She'd seen Orrin arrive. She'd seen Colt's face. She was already reading the situation from 50 feet away, which was a skill she'd had ample opportunity to develop. They sat at the kitchen table. 3 cups of coffee. Nobody was drinking with much enthusiasm. "The signature discrepancies needs to be formally noted," Ada said, immediately and practically. "No preamble. Before Telfer moves on the complaint. If I'm returned to my father's custody before the land document is challenged." "He gets another signature," Orrin said. "One I won't be able to falsify. He'll watch every letter." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I need the original deed with my mother's filing, and I need my existing signature on record compared side by side with the transfer document. If someone at the land office does that comparison, the transfer falls apart," Colt said, "potentially." "Who at the land office?" Ada went quiet for a moment. Something careful happening behind her eyes. "There's a clerk," she said. "He was present when I signed the transfer. He witnessed it." Her jaw moved slightly. "He saw my wrists. He looked at them and then he looked away and picked up his pen." Orrin made a sound, not a word. "Something more fundamental than a word. He knows," Ada said. "Whether he'll say so is another question." His name was Ledger Oates, 26 years old. Son of a furniture maker from the east side of town, which meant he'd grown up watching his father measure twice and cut once and treat accuracy as its own form of respect. He'd inherited the precision. What he hadn't fully inherited was his father's willingness to say what he saw when saying it was inconvenient. Colt went to the land office at 10. The office was narrow. 1 long counter, shelves of ledgers organized by year and parcel section, a desk set back near the window. The kind of organization a person maintains obsessively because the alternative is chaos. And chaos in a land office means disputes. And disputes mean people arriving angry. Ledger was at the counter when Colt came in. Young face with careful eyes that were already bracing. Because this was Caldwell. And in Caldwell, everyone had already heard something. They looked at each other. She transposed 2 letters in her middle name when she signed the transfer, Colt said. Quiet. Factual. The way you state something when you need it heard clearly, without the distortion of emotion. On purpose. Because she was brought in here with marks on her wrists from a chain, and a man standing beside her who put them there. And you saw that. Ledger didn't move. You looked at her wrists, Colt said, and then you looked away. Something happened in Ledger's face. Not collapse and not confession. Something smaller and more complicated. The expression of a person who has been carrying a thing they knew they were carrying, and has just had someone put a name to it. I didn't know what to do, he said. I know. Colt said. I've been there. It doesn't sit well afterward. Ledger looked at his shelves. The organized accuracy of 30 years of Ford County land transfers, each one filed and indexed and accessible. If I pull the records, he said slowly, and the discrepancy is what you say, then the transfer is questionable at best, Colt said, and you'll have to say what you saw. A long silence. Give me an hour, Ledger said. I'll wait, Colt said. He waited on the boardwalk outside in the August heat while Caldwell moved around him. He was standing there, watching the traffic on the main street, when Decker Strand came out of the sheriff's office, across the street. 40 feet away. He saw Colt the same moment. Colt saw him. They looked at each other across that distance of dust and heat. Decker's face moved through several things quickly: surprise, calculation, and then something that settled into cold resolve. Not anger. Anger burns. This was something that had cooled into a different shape. He didn't cross the street. He walked the other direction, back toward the silver Colt, which was, in its way, more concerning than if he'd come across 45 minutes. Ledger brought out a folder with 2 documents: Ada's mother's original deed, Ada Strand named as sole heir, and a land tax payment receipt from 3 years prior, signed Ada Marin Strand. At 14, every letter correct, clear and consistent. Ledger set them side by side on the counter. The difference was right there, visible. The kind of thing that once seen cannot be unseen. Ada Marin Strand, Ada Marn Strand. I'll need to make a formal notation, Ledger said. His voice had changed slightly. Something had settled in it, like pressure released, about the discrepancy. For the file. Yes, Colt said, and I'll need to make a statement. About what I observed in April. Yes, Colt said. A pause. She knew I'd seen it, Ledger said. Not a question. She was counting on it, Colt said. She just needed someone to ask you. Ledger looked at the 2 signatures side by side for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. They came that evening. 4 of them, Decker in front. 2 men from town with the practiced lean of men who hired themselves out for the look of things. And 1 man Colt hadn't seen before. Older, quiet, with the specific kind of quiet that had history in it. Colt was finishing the afternoon check on the gray mare's left front when the dust came up the road. He straightened, watched them come, and walked to the gate without hurrying. Orrin appeared from somewhere without being summoned. He was good at that. He came and stood beside Colt, at the fence post with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has made a decision before breakfast and is done being moved off it. The 4 riders pulled up. Decker looked worse than he had in the stable. Something had gone further in, or something had gone further out, the calculation more visible now, without the earlier anger to cover it. The red of his face was more pronounced, a man running on what's left when sleep stops working. I want my daughter, he said. Not loud. Not theatrical, just stating. She's not your property, Colt said. She's my daughter. Those aren't the same thing. One of the town men shifted in his saddle. The older, quiet man hadn't moved at all. Who's your friend? Colt said to Decker. Decker didn't answer. The older man answered for himself. Holt, he said. Deputy. Amos Telfer sent me to observe. Colt looked at him more carefully. Someone Telfer trusted to see without prejudging. The kind of presence that wasn't an intervention but might become one. Then observe, Colt said. He turned back to Decker. There's a formal discrepancy notation, already filed at the land office, as of this morning. The clerk witnessed the signing, and will testify. And Doc Pruitt has a medical record from April 14th that describes injuries inconsistent with the explanation you gave him. Something went through Decker's face. Not shock. He'd suspected this was coming. But suspecting something and having it arrive are different experiences. Those are lies, Decker said. They're documented, Colt said. There's a difference. Ada came out of the house. Nobody had expected that. Including Colt. She came through the front door and walked across the yard to the fence. Not slowly, not dramatically, just walking. With the economy of someone who doesn't waste motion. She stopped beside Colt, and she looked at her father, 4 riders, 40 feet of yard between them. The August evening coming in gold and merciless. She looked at him the way you look at something you have thought about for a very long time, and are now finally seeing without the mediation of anticipation. Not with hatred, not with tears, with steady, complete attention. Decker looked back at her for one moment, just one. The calculation in his face dropped. What was underneath it was complicated. Not love exactly, or not only love, something more ruined than that. The face of a man looking at something he has damaged beyond easy repair and understanding, fully, the extent of the damage he has done. 3 seconds, maybe. Then the quiet man on the horse said, Mr. Strand, you've made your statement. Time to let the process move forward. Decker turned his horse. The town men turned theirs. The quiet man stayed a moment, Miss Strand, he said. There'll be a formal meeting at the sheriff's office. Day after tomorrow. You'll have the opportunity to speak. Ada looked at him. I'll be there, she said. He nodded and rode after Decker. The yard went quiet. That night, Colt sat at the kitchen table across from Ada, while the oil lamp burned low, and Doc Pruitt's notebook lay open between them. She went through it line by line. Not reading for the first time, reading to embed, to make the words automatic, the way you make something automatic by running it until it becomes reflex. He saw everything, she said quietly. He did, Colt said. I knew he had. She traced a line of handwriting with her fingertip. When he was examining my wrists, he didn't look at my face. Doctors look at your face while they work. He was looking at my wrists and not looking at me, which meant he didn't want me to see what he was thinking. A pause. Witnesses look at what they're seeing. Guilty people look away. She closed the notebook. Colt? Yeah. Did you ever let someone fall when you could have caught them? The lamp flame moved. One flicker. Then steady. He owed her the honest answer, and the honest answer took a moment to find. My neighbor Tolliver, he said. He had a wife whose explanations for bruises never matched what bruises look like, I noticed. I was at the feed store once. He was there, and I almost said something. He looked at the grain of the table's wood. So I decided it wasn't my business. What happened to her? She left eventually. Went to her sister in Wichita. A pause. Nothing catastrophic. As far as I know. As far as you know, Ada said. As far as I know, he said. That part's important. I made a choice that meant I'd never know. And that, he stopped. That doesn't sleep well, Ada said. No, it doesn't, she nodded. The slow, complete nod of someone who has received the answer they needed. That's why you didn't walk past the stable door, she said. I wasn't going to have another Tolliver, he said. I was done with that. They sat in the quiet. The Kansas night outside. The horses shifting in the barn. You need to sleep, Colt said finally. Day after tomorrow is going to require everything you have, I know. She stood with the notebook. Colt? Yeah. I've said what I'm going to say 100 times in my head. In that stable. In the dark, she looked at him. But saying it in a room, out loud, with my father there. It'll be different, he said. Yes. It'll also be the last time you have to say it to prove it, he said. After that, it'll just be yours. Something moved in her face. Not tears. The thing underneath tears. Good night, Colt, she said. Good night, Ada. She went to her room. The lock turned. He sat alone with the lamp and the notebook and the Kansas night, and thought about Tolliver's wife and Anna and what Doc Pruitt had said. Do better than that. Until it was late enough to sleep. The next day came in gray and cool, a front moving through from the west, with the unexpected mercy of lower temperatures and the smell of rain somewhere ahead. In Kansas in August, this was the kind of gift you accepted without questioning. Ada was up before dawn. He heard her moving in the kitchen, quiet, practiced movements. The automatic economy of someone who has spent a long time making as little noise as possible. He dressed and came out. She was at the window with coffee, looking at the gray sky. It's going to rain, she said. Maybe, he said. My mother said rain before something important was good luck. She looked at the clouds. I don't know if I believe that. Do you believe anything about luck? He said. She thought about it genuinely. I believe in preparation, she said. Luck is what you call preparation, when you'd rather not give it credit. He poured coffee. Ada, she turned. He looked at her. This girl who wasn't a girl, who had been managing an impossible situation with the methodical precision of someone twice her age, in a locked stable, with a chain on her wrist, carving boundary markers into a post so she wouldn't forget the legal description of the land that was her inheritance. You're going to walk into that room today, he said, and you're going to say what you know to be true, and I'm going to be standing beside you. Not in front of you, not speaking for you. Beside you. She looked at him. Place in this. You understand, she said. I'm starting to, he said. The gray light came through the window. The horses moved in the barn. Outside, somewhere west, the rain was coming. Orrin arrived at 7. On time, clean shirt, hat he'd taken some trouble with. The deliberate presentation of a man making a point with his clothing. He wasn't alone. Behind him, on foot, was a woman Colt hadn't expected, Ruth Alcott, 60 years old. She ran the seamstress shop on the east end of Caldwell's Main Street, in a building that had been her husband's, and had become, after his death 14 years ago, entirely hers. Colt knew her the way you know someone in a town this size, by sight and reputation, and by the specific quality of attention she paid to everything around her, which most people misread as nosiness, and was actually something closer to vigilance. The watchfulness of a woman who had learned that the people most likely to see what was happening were often the ones nobody thought to watch. She was carrying a dress over one arm. Dark blue, well-made. She looked at Ada without introduction. The way women sometimes skip the formalities of introduction, when the situation has already made the formalities beside the point. "You'll need something proper for this morning," she said. "Not charity. I'll take it in tonight and you can work it off later if that suits you." Ada looked at her for a moment. "It suits me," she said. Ruth handed over the dress, then looked at Colt. "I've been watching that family for 8 months," she said. "Flat, factual, not dramatic about it. From my shop window. I see a great deal from my shop window that people assume no one sees." A pause. "If you need me this morning, I'll be outside." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked back toward Caldwell, her pace deliberate. Orrin watched her go. "She came to me yesterday," he said. "Said she wanted to be useful." "She does," Ada said quietly. She was looking at the dress. Something in her expression that was too complicated to name simply. "People like that always do." Ada came out of the room in Ruth Alcott's dress, taken in at the sides, hemmed right. Dark hair braided back, hands at her sides. She didn't look like someone about to be judged. She looked like someone about to speak. The three of them climbed into Colt's wagon. The gray sky moved overhead. The air had the clean weight of weather coming. Nobody spoke much. The plan was the truth. The truth was ready. And Ada Strand, 18 years old, had been preparing to tell it for 14 months. The sheriff's office in Caldwell was not a large room, 12 feet wide, maybe 16 deep. A desk, 4 chairs, a wood stove unlit since April, shelves with ledgers and law books, and a coffee tin that had been part of the furniture long enough that removing it would leave a gap. Not a courtroom. But it would do. By 8 in the morning the room was full, and the boardwalk outside the window was fuller. Caldwell had turned out the way small towns turn out when something important is happening that everyone has been waiting to see resolved, and nobody will admit to waiting for. Woman from the church steps. Men from the feed store who had found reasons to be this part down at this particular hour. The woman from the laundry on the East End, still in her work apron. The bartender from the Silver Colt, which said something about the morning's business, or about how much he wanted to see how this ended. They stood outside. Hats off, most of them. The posture of people present at something serious. Sheriff Amos Telfer sat behind his desk, with his hands flat on the surface, and the expression of a man who had spent the previous night deciding exactly how he was going to conduct this morning. Not what the outcome would be, how he would conduct it. There was a difference, and Telfer understood the difference. Decker Strand sat to the left with his Dodge City lawyer, Garrett, a man who wore his suit like armor and had the careful ease of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and understood their grammar. Papers on his knee, organized and ready, Rudd Kane sat behind Decker, not at the table. In a chair he had placed himself in the corner, which was its own statement. Not a party to the proceeding. An interested observer with a leather satchel on his knee, the most patient man in the room. Ledger Oates sat near the window with a folder on his lap, and the expression of a young man who had made a decision he was still making peace with, but was not going to unmake. Doc Pruitt sat beside him, brown notebook in his hands, sitting the way a man sits when he has decided to stop someone who doesn't say things. Oren at the back, standing, because there were no more chairs, and because standing suited him today. Colt sat to the right of the central table. Ada sat beside him. She had walked into the room the way she walked everywhere. Steady, unhurried, the way someone walks when the hardest decision is already behind them. She'd looked at her father when she came in, direct, brief, and then looked away. Not because she was afraid, because she had already finished that part. Decker had looked at the floor, which said something. Garrett argued smoothly. A father's authority over an unmarried daughter, still recognized by Ford County statute. A land transfer document signed and witnessed and filed. A kidnapping complaint documented and witnessed. He spoke for 11 minutes. Nobody interrupted. Outside, the boardwalk was absolutely quiet. Everyone listening. Garrett finished, set his papers in order, folded his hands. Telfer looked at Ada. "Miss Strand," he said. "You may speak." She stood. The room went the kind of quiet that doesn't happen because people decide to be quiet. It happens because something is about to occur that the body knows matters before the mind catches up. Ada straightened. Looked at Telfer, not at Garrett, not at her father, at Telfer, because Telfer was the person in this room with actual authority. And Ada Strand did not waste her attention. "My name is Ada Marin Strand," she said. "I am 18 years old. The creekfront property referred to in this proceeding was left to me by my mother, Ellen Strand, in a will properly filed at this county's land office 14 months ago. That land is mine, under the law of this county, under my mother's instruction, and under the plain fact that I am an adult and the named heir, clear, not loud, not performing, just stating what she knew to be true. I signed a transfer document 3 months ago at the land office. I signed it while my father's hand was on my arm. I had bruising on both wrists at the time of signing. I had been told I would not leave the land office until I had signed it. She set the document on the table. I signed it wrong, on purpose. My full legal name is Ada Marin Strand. The signature on that document reads Ada Marn Strand. 2 letters transposed in the middle name. I planned this 2 months before the day I was brought in to sign, because I knew that day was coming, and I needed something in my hand when it arrived. She lifted her wrists, both of them. Held them there long enough for the room to see. Long enough for the people at the window to see. These are from the chain. In the stall at my father's stable, where I was kept. 3 times a day, she lowered her hands. My father told Doc Pruitt in April that I fell from a horse. I was not near a horse in April. I have not been permitted near a horse unsupervised in 6 months. Decker made a sound, something between a word and not a word. Ada turned her eyes to her father. What was in her face was not rage, not tears, not the hot, bright emotion people perform when they want to be seen suffering. Something quieter and more complete. The look of someone who has already done the internal work, who has already grieved the father he hadn't been, and is now simply reporting the facts of it to people who needed to know them. Then she looked back at Telfer. "If I signed that document freely," she said, "why would I falsify my own name?" Garrett was ready. He was good at his job that needed acknowledging. A young woman under emotional stress. He began, following her mother's death. "I planned it 2 months in advance," Ada said. "Distress can cause." "I identified 3 boundary markers," Ada said. "The southern coordinates of the creek parcel. I memorized them in order and carved them on a post in the stable where I was being kept. In case I ever needed to describe the property's legal boundary to someone official." She looked at Garrett directly. "That is not distress. That is preparation." Garrett paused. 1 beat. But everyone in the room heard it. "The signature doesn't match," Ledger Oates said. The room turned. Ledger was at the window, folder open. His voice had the careful quality of someone who has practiced saying something and is now saying it and finding that it sounds smaller than it felt, which is actually how courage usually sounds. "I pulled the original records yesterday. Ada Strand's signature on file at this office. From a land tax document 3 years prior. Is Ada Marenstrand clear, consistent? Every letter correct. He held up both documents. The transfer signature is Ada Marnstrand. The discrepancy is not a clerical error. The letters are deliberately rearranged. He looked at Telfer. I've made a formal notation in the county file. Something moved in Garrett's expression. Not defeat. The recalculation of a man who has just had one of his legs removed and is assessing how the remaining ones will hold. I was also present, Ledger said. Quieter now, when Ada Strand came in to sign. In April, he looked at his hands, then at Ada. She had visible bruising on both wrists. I noted it. I did not ask about it. A pause. I should have asked. I didn't. That is something I have to account for. Decker's jaw moved. He said nothing. Garrett said nothing. Rudd Kane said nothing. Just sat with his satchel and his patience and the expression of a man running new numbers. Doc Pruitt stood. Nobody asked him to. He simply stood the way a man stands when he has been waiting for the moment and has decided the moment is now. He opened the brown notebook. April 14th, 1883, he read. Steady, slow. The voice of a man being careful. Patient presented with bilateral wrist contusions. Distribution and depth inconsistent with the stated mechanism of a horse fall. Injury pattern consistent with prolonged contact with a restraint device, metal, based on the width and uniformity of the marks. He turned the page. Patient displayed elevated startle response to sudden movement. Did not meet examiner's eyes during questioning. Answered all questions with minimal words and maximum speed. Was not alone in the examination room. He closed the notebook. I wrote down what I saw. I have the date. I have the detail. I have the medical opinion. He looked at Telfer. I did not bring it forward in April. I am bringing it forward now. I am sorry it took this long. He sat. The room was completely quiet. Outside the window, nobody on the boardwalk was moving. The transfer has stayed, Telfer said. Everyone looked at him. He had been quiet for 20 minutes, listening the way a careful man listens, completely. Without waiting for his turn to speak, the signature discrepancy notation filed yesterday constitutes grounds for a formal stay pending review, he said. The property remains in Ada Strand's name during that review. He looked at Garrett. Your client may contest through appropriate legal channels. Garrett's jaw tightened. Fractionally. Rudd Kane stood. Everyone turned. He straightened his jacket, picked up his satchel. A man who has made a calculation and is satisfied with the result, even if the result isn't what he came expecting. I want to be clear, he said, addressing the room. My financial arrangement is with Decker Strand, not with his daughter. Not with this property, he looked at Ada. Miss Strand, I have no claim on you. Whatever your father told you about the necessity of this transaction, the necessity was his. You never owed me anything. Ada looked at him. Then why, she said. Did you make your offer expire this morning? Kane looked at her for a moment. The expression of a man accustomed to being the most precise person in the room, who has just encountered someone equally precise. Because that's how offers work, he said. No, Ada said. That's how pressure works. A moment. Fair, Kane said. Simply, he told Telfer he'd be pursuing the debt through civil channels against Decker Strand directly. He nodded to the room, not to anyone specifically, and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the room felt somehow larger. Decker Strand, Telfer said. I'm placing you under arrest on grounds of unlawful confinement. The evidence presented today, documented medical records, witness testimony from a land office employee, and Ada Strand's own testimony, is sufficient to hold you pending formal charges. He stood. The kidnapping complaint against Colt Reeves is dismissed. The assault complaint is noted but insufficient. Given the documented circumstances, he looked at Colt. Try not to make a habit of taking the law into your own hands. I'll do my best, Colt said. Do better than that, Telfer said. But there was something in it that wasn't entirely a reprimand. The deputy came forward and placed his hands on Decker's shoulders. Not roughly, just firmly. The grammar of an arrest. Decker stood slowly. Older than he'd looked 2 days ago. He let the deputy take his arm, and then he looked at Ada one more time, not calculating, not managing, just looking. And Ada looked back. She didn't look forgiving or unforgiving. She looked the way she had looked at him the day Colt drove her away from the Strand property, like someone who has already done the internal work, who has already grieved the father he hadn't been, who was not going to perform additional grief for the benefit of a room. Decker nodded once. Barely Ada didn't nod back, but she didn't look away. The deputy walked Decker to the back room. The door closed. The room took a moment to become a room. Again Garrett gathered his papers with professional composure. A man who has lost cases before and understands that losing a case is not the same as losing a livelihood. He nodded to Colt, small and acknowledging, and walked out. Ledger Oates closed his folder. "Miss Strand," he said from across the room. She looked at him. "I should have asked in April," he said. "I want you to know I understand that." Ada was quiet for a moment. "You said it today," she said, out loud. "In front of people, it was late." "Yes," she said, "but you said it, not absolution. Not the warm forgiveness that stories sometimes offer too quickly. Something more honest, an acknowledgement that late is not the same as never, and that a person accounting for themselves is not the same as a person being excused." Ledger nodded and walked out. Locke Pruitt buttoned his coat and came to where Ada was standing. He held out his hand. She shook it. "You handled this with more precision than most adults I've known," he said. "My mother taught me the land deeds section by section," Ada said. "She said if I knew what I owned, no one could convince me I didn't own it." "Smart woman," Doc said. "The smartest," Ada said. He walked out, Orrin near the door, Colt beside Ada. The documents on the table, the transfer with the wrong name, the original deed with the right one, side by side. Ada picked up the original deed. "Read it." Not for information. She knew it by heart. She read it the way you read something that has been the whole point of a very long thing, to feel the end of it in your hands. "Colt," she said. "Yeah, I need to go there." "Yes," he said. Outside, the gray sky had made good on its morning promise. A decent Kansas rain, purposeful and steady, not interested in drama. The boardwalk had mostly emptied. People dispersed back to their days. The thing they'd come to witness now witnessed. Ruth Alcott was there, standing outside the window where she'd stood and listened. She stepped forward when Colt and Ada came out. She looked at Ada. Not with sympathy, with something that recognized one person's specific kind of endurance and knew it from the inside. "Your dress fits well," she said. "It does," Ada said. "Good," Ruth said. "It's yours. Keep it." She stepped back. That was that. The ride to the creekfront parcel was 20 minutes through the soft rain. The three of them. Colt and Ada on the bench. Orrin in the back, because Orrin had decided he was part of this until it was finished, and nobody had argued with him about it. The rain was the kind you can exist in, without being damaged by it. The land came into view as the wagon crested a small rise, flat first, then the tree line, cottonwoods along the creek bank, deep-rooted, the kind of trees that find water when other things can't, Kansas land. Flat and wide and honest about what it was. The kind that didn't promise anything except that it would be here reliable. Nothing would take it except time. Colt stopped the wagon at the edge of the property and didn't get down. Ada sat for a moment. The rain touched her face, light and steady. Then she climbed down from the wagon and stood at the edge of the parcel and looked at it. The trees, the dry creek bed, the flat grass, the north fence that needed repair. The general condition of land that had been in legal limbo for months and showed it. She took one step onto the property, then another. She walked, not running, not overwhelmed. Walking the way you walk on something that belongs to you. The particular quality of movement that comes when you are not a guest somewhere, not permitted to be somewhere, not tolerated, when you simply are somewhere that is yours. She walked to the cottonwoods and put her hand on the bark of the nearest one and stood there. Rain through the leaves in a soft, irregular pattern. The smell of wet earth and cottonwood in Kansas. She stood there for a long time. Colt watched from the wagon. Oren said nothing, which was right. When Ada came back, she was wet. Not soaked, just touched by the rain. Braid loosened slightly, the blue dress dark at the shoulders. She climbed back up to the bench and sat looking at the tree line. "The north fence needs work," she said. "It does," Colt said. "The creek bed will fill when the rains come in autumn. My mother said it always did. That this section never went fully dry more than—" She stopped. "A fractional catch, then steady again. She said this was the most reliable land in Ford County. That it would always have water when other places didn't." "She was probably right," Colt said. "She was always right about land," Ada said. She said land doesn't lie. People lie about land. But the land itself just is what it is, a moment. "What do you want to do with it?" Colt said. Ada turned her face slightly, looking at the parcel, the sky going lighter, the rain easing. "I don't know yet," she said it, and the texture of it was nothing like uncertainty. It was the opposite, the specific sound of a person who has spent a very long time having no choices and has just arrived at a place where the choices are real and open and genuinely hers. "I don't know yet," she said again. And that, she stopped. She laughed, a short, surprised sound, like it came out before she could stop it. Like her own reaction startled her. "That's the best thing I've said in 14 months, she said. Oren, in the back of the wagon, made a sound. Low and warm. The sound a man makes when he is moved by something and doesn't want to make a production of it. "Take your time," Colt said. They drove back to Caldwell in the afternoon. The rain had stopped. The sky had gone from pewter to the particular pale blue of Kansas after rain, clean and enormous. The kind of sky that makes you understand why people came here. At its best, Kansas looked like possibility. Today it looked like that. Oren got down in town and looked at Ada with the expression of a man who doesn't make speeches and was not about to start. "You need anything," he said. "You know where I am." "Thank you, Oren," Ada said. He nodded once and rode east. That evening Colt went to the jail alone. The stone building on the south end of Main Street. 2 cells. Lamp burning low in the entryway. Decker was in the left cell, sitting on the cot, jacket off, looking like a man who had been many things and was currently being none of them. The calculation was gone from his face. The constant working of angles was gone. What was underneath was just a man. Tired and used up, looking at the end of a road he shouldn't have taken. "Ada doesn't hate you," Colt said. Silence. "I thought you should know that. Because you're probably telling yourself she does." Decker looked at his hands. "She should," he said. "Maybe," Colt said. "But she doesn't. She's more complicated than that, and more honest." A pause. "She stood up in that room today and said what happened, factually, without embellishment. She didn't call you a monster. She said what you did." "There's not much difference," Decker said. "There's a significant difference," Colt said. "A monster is what you are. What you did is what you chose. Those aren't the same." Something moved in Decker's face, sharp. Like the distinction had landed somewhere that still felt things. "She looks like her mother," he said roughly. "When she walked in this morning, the way she sat," he stopped. "Ellen would have hated what I did." "Yes," Colt said. Probably a silence. "Why are you here, Reeves?" Colt looked at him. At this man who had built a cage for his own daughter, out of desperation and shame, and the particular cowardice of a person who takes their failures out on whoever is closest. "Because Ada told me she doesn't hate you," Colt said. "And I thought if nobody told you that, you'd spend the next however long believing the worst version. And that's not what she'd want, she." "He made a plan," Decker said slowly, working out the shape of it. 2 months before I brought her in to sign. She already had it, she had it, Colt said. The boundary markers memorized, the signature ready. She'd been building it from the month after your wife died. Something went through Decker's face. Not pride. Something adjacent. The complicated, painful, entirely too late recognition of what his daughter actually was. "Ellen taught her all of it," he said. "I know. Ellen knew she wasn't going to be there. She spent those last months making sure." His voice gave. "He let it. She was preparing Ada. And I was. He stopped. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The silence in the cell did it. Colt turned to go. She really doesn't hate me, Decker said. Not a question, not asking for reassurance, just sitting with it. No, Colt said. She really doesn't. He walked out. Ada was on the porch when he got back, feet on the rail, cup of coffee in her hands. The stars out in the rain-washed sky, more of them than usual, more than seemed reasonable, the kind of abundance that makes Kansas make sense. He tied the horse, came up the steps, sat in the other chair. She handed him her cup. Coffee. Still warm. He drank. You went to see him, she said. Yes. Why? He thought about how to say it honestly. Because I needed to see what's left. When the thing holding a person together falls away, he said. Whether it's something worth something, and? He's just a man, Colt said. A man who ran out of better options before he ran out of worse ones. He handed the cup back. He knows what he did. Ada looked at the stars. Good, she said. Not vindictive. Just. Good, he said. Your mother knew, Colt said, that she was preparing you. Ada was still. She told me, she said, the last month. When she knew she was running out of time, she said, I can't make your father different. But I can make you ready. A pause. And then she spent the next 4 weeks making me ready. Colt looked at the stars. She was a remarkable woman, he said. The most remarkable person I've ever known, Ada said. And I've been lucky enough to also know. She stopped. A small catch. Gone quickly. I've been lucky enough to know a few others. Since, the night moved around them. Insects, a distant something. The horses in the barn, their nighttime sounds. What are you going to do? Colt said. With the land. With any of it. She set the cup on the rail. Fix the north fence first, she said. He almost laughed. Then wait for the creek to fill in autumn, she said. My mother said, it always comes back. Even in the driest years. I want to see that. All right, he said. After that, I don't know. I have land. I have a deed with my name on it. I have options. Which I have not had for 14 months. And I am going to take my time with them. She looked at him sideways. The assessing look. The one that had been running calculations from the first moment he'd opened the stable door. Colt, yeah. When you opened that stable door, I'd been in there since the morning before. 30-odd hours, and I had the boundary markers memorized, and the wrong name, ready, and a plan that was 14 months in the making. A pause, and I still didn't know if any of it was going to work. Because a plan is a plan. It's not a guarantee. I know, he said. What you did wasn't save me. You know that. I need you to know that. I know you know that. I know it, he said. You opened a door, she said, and you stood beside me. And you didn't speak for me or summarize me or tell me what I meant. She looked at the stars. You just stood there. And let me be whoever I already was. Colt looked at the sky, at the enormous rain-washed Kansas stars. That wasn't hard, he said. You made it easy. Don't sell yourself short, she said. Most people make it very hard. I used to make it hard, he said. I know, she said. You told me. And then I stopped, he said. Yes, she said. You did. The night was big around them, the kind that opens upward instead of pressing down, the kind that makes you feel there's more room ahead than you thought. Ada set her empty cup on the rail. Good night, Colt, she said. Good night, Ada. She went inside. The door closed. The lock turned, her habit. Maybe always her habit. Maybe someday not, but tonight the lock. And that was fine. He sat on the porch for a long time after. Coffee he'd forgotten to pour. The cup on the rail, empty. He thought about the bay gelding he'd never bought. Somewhere in a Strand corral, a horse with a bad left tendon was waiting for someone to buy him who knew what they were getting. He thought about Anna, not with the old ache that was mostly sorrow, but with something warmer, something that felt like her voice saying a particular kind of thing. She would have found all of this entirely obvious. What needed to be done and how to do it. She would have been faintly puzzled that anyone had needed convincing. He missed that about her, the clarity. He thought about the fence on the south corner, about Ada's north fence, about the creek filling in autumn. He thought about 14 months of a girl in a stable carving boundary markers into wood, getting the plan ready, waiting for the door to open. He thought about how close it had come to not working. If he'd walked past the stable, if he'd taken the gelding and ridden home, if the tap sound from inside had been something he'd decided to explain away. He didn't think about that too long, because he hadn't walked past. He'd opened the door, and Ada Strand had been waiting on the other side with a plan she'd built in the dark. With a wrong name ready, with 3 marks on a post that were not what anyone had assumed they were. She hadn't needed saving. She'd needed one person to stop looking the other way. That Tuesday. That had been him. He didn't know that it was brave. He just knew it was what a decent man did, and that the difference between a locked door and an open one is almost always just that, one person, one choice. One moment where you decide that looking away is not something you're willing to do anymore. He was done looking away, completely done. The morning came clear, sharp, clean blue, Kansas after rain, everything washed overnight and set out to dry. Colt was at the fence with his coffee when Ada came out. Her own cup. She came and stood beside him. They looked at the property, the barn, the corral, the horses in the early light. The south fence corner, still needing work. I was thinking, Ada said. Yeah? About the gelding. He looked at her. The one you went to buy. At my father's property. You never got him. I didn't, he said. His tendon is manageable, she said. With proper care and attention to his workload in cold weather. He's young. Sound otherwise, she drank her coffee. My father's property is going to have to be sorted out by the county. Whatever happens with the legal process. A pause. Someone should think about the horses. Someone should, he said. I'm good with horses, she said. My mother taught me. She looked at the corral. I know which ones are sound and which ones aren't and what each one needs, I know. Colt said. I saw that on day 1. She looked at him sideways. Assessing. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I'm just thinking out loud, I know, he said. I have land. But plans take time to build. And in the meantime, I am an 18-year-old woman, with no money and good horse sense and a piece of land that won't generate income until I make it. She set her cup on the fence post. Just thinking out loud, Colt looked at the corral. 12 horses, a fence that had been waiting 2 weeks, a schedule that was already full. The spare room is empty, he said. Ada looked at him. Has been since Anna died, he said. It's just a room. A pause. It has a lock on the inside, Ada said. It does, he said. I know, she said. I've been using it. He almost smiled. I'm not asking for anything either, he said. I'm just noting that a person who knows horses and is going to be in the area anyway might as well contribute. Earn her keep, Ada said. I was going to say contribute, he said. But sure, she picked her cup back up, drank. Considered, the south fence needs work, she said. I know, he said. I can do fence work, she said. I know, he said, and I want to check on that gelding, she said. We'll figure that out, he said. She nodded, slowly, completely. The way she made all her decisions. They stood at the fence with their coffees in the early light. The horses moved in the corral. The sky did its morning blue. The air had the good smell of rain and grass in a day that was going to be whatever it was going to be. And for the first time in 14 months, Ada Strand didn't know exactly what that was, and she was standing there anyway. Unhurried, unafraid rigidity.